Hi everybody, and welcome back to my continuing talks about my thoughts on the book of Esther in the Bible. I'm really excited about what's happening today in Esther because the plot is going to thicken. Yesterday we talked about how this was taking place at a time when Jews were in captivity in the Babylonian Empire. They're living in Persia, and they've been there for 100 years, so they've been there a long time. But right now we're in the time of King Xerxes. And King Xerxes decided to show how much power he had, so he threw this big 6-month fiasco of showing everybody all his power, all his might, and all his glory, whatever. And then the last 7 days he had a bigger feast, and at the end of that feast, he asked his eunuchs to go and get his Queen Vashti, because she's so beautiful, and he wants to show her off to everybody. And instead of that, Queen Vashti refuses him. Why she refuses, I don't know. Although I think it would have maybe been against the customs of the time for a woman to parade herself in front of people unless she was a harlot. And so that may have been a reason, or maybe she was peeved at him for having this long celebration, or I don't know. I really don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us why. It just says she refused. And I think we need to take a look at that and realize that at this point, we need to remember that before we read the next part, that in those days, in the times of Persia and the Medes, the Persian Medes system of government and so on, that the king was really considered to be almost like a god, or as a god. So what he said went. I mean, that was it. His word was law. And not only that, they had a law at that time in that culture that when the king made an edict or a command, that it could not be rescinded. It could not be taken back. Other laws could be made to change that, but basically that law had to stand once it was established by a king. Even if, like this king, he was drunk when he made the rule. Even if he made an edict in a rash way or with bad advice, didn't matter. Once the king made an edict, it stood and it could not be repealed. So that's important to listen to as we go through what's going to happen next. So we're in Esther 1, and he has already sent for the queen, and so now he's going to turn to his advisors, because this is in verse 12, when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger. He immediately consulted with his wise advisors who knew the Persian laws and customs, for he always asked their advice. The names of these men were Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Memucan. 7 nobles of Persia and Media. They met with the king regularly and held the highest positions in the empire. What must be done to Queen Vashti, the king demanded. What penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders, properly sent through his eunuchs? Memucan, well, that's one of his advisors, Memucan answered the king and his nobles. Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also every noble and citizen throughout our empire. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn that Queen Vashti has refused to appear before the king. Before the day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia and Mede will hear what the queen did and will start treating their husbands the same way. There will be no end to their contempt and anger. So this guy is telling the king, hey, what the queen does, everybody in the land will do. So if this woman thinks that she can flout her husband's orders, then every woman is going to start acting that way. So he's not even concerned about the queen and the king. He's more concerned about probably his own family and what's going to happen when these women start acting up and they start defying their husbands. Okay, so now this is the solution that he comes up with. In verse 19. So, if it please the king, we suggest that you issue a written decree, a law of the Persians and Medes that cannot be revoked. It should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of King Xerxes. and that the king should choose another queen, more worthy than she. When this decree is published throughout the king's vast empire, husbands everywhere, whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. The king and the nobles thought this made good sense, so he followed Memucan's counsel. He sent letters to all parts of the empire, to each province in its own script and language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler of his own home and should say whatever he pleases. So, we have here a pretty strong edict. He's going to get rid of the queen. She's not going to be queen anymore. He doesn't want her. He's going to get a different queen. And he's telling all the women of the land that they need to do whatever their husband pleases. They need to obey. You know, God's plan for marriage is a lot different from that. I think we all know that that we can't force someone into love and obedience. You know, not true obedience. If we make rules, we can't force somebody to respect us or to love us. It just doesn't work that way. And God's plan for marriage is that marriage would really reflect and model the marriage between Christ and the church. And there's an interesting verse in Ephesians. Let's see. Well, first of all, let's go to John first, because in John 14, he makes this connection. God makes the connection. Jesus talks to his disciples and says, I want you to get this connection between love and obedience. Okay, not rules and obedience, but love and obedience. So in verse 23 of, let's see, where am I? John 14, I think. Yeah, John 14:23. This is what Jesus said. Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. Anyone who does not love me will not obey my teaching. These words you hear are not my own. They belong to the Father who sent me. So he's really telling them that love and obedience go together. Even in verse 21, he says the same thing. Whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. And the one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them. So here there's a connection between love and obedience. And it means that if you love somebody, you want to do what pleases them. We find this with our children, that, you know, we do have to set up boundaries and rules for our children, but eventually as they get older, they start to do the things we want them to do just because we're family and they respect and love us. And the same is true in many of our relationships. We don't obey just because somebody makes a rule. You know, I love this country, and I think that's part of the reason why I'm obeying these rules and regulations about staying in and sheltering and social distancing. I love my neighbors and my family and my friends, and I don't want them to get sick. So this is why we obey that rule, out of the love that we have in our hearts. Let's face it, if we wanted to flaunt that rule, we could find a way to do it without getting caught, you know. But it isn't about that. We don't do it because someone's watching. We obey because we know it's the right thing to do and because we love others. It's a way to show love, is to be obedient. And the verse I was mentioning earlier comes from Ephesians, is a verse about husbands, how husbands should treat their wives. And look how different this is from the way these men are treating their wives. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle, holy and blameless. In this same way, the husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does for the church. It's interesting. I love this verse that says, he who loves his wife loves himself. You know, when we are good to the people around us, it only brings good back to us. And these guys in this court are telling King Xerxes, no, let's make some hard and fast rules. Let's force these women into submission. And so, remembering that this edict cannot be repealed, and he's going to go ahead and set up this rule that Queen Vashti is out and all the women you need to obey, you know, instead of loving her or finding out what's the problem, you know. This king is quite full of himself here. We can tell in all the things he does that he's rash, he's drunk, and he's full of himself. So, the first verse of chapter 2 tells you what happened when he sobered up. But after Xerxes' anger had subsided, he began thinking about Vashti and what she had done and the decree he had made. So his personal attendants suggested, let us search the empire to find beautiful young virgins for the king. Okay, so now we have that King Xerxes made this rash decision, got Queen Vashti out. However, look how God is behind the scenes. He is going to use King Xerxes' rash decision to open up a place for another queen. And maybe a Jewish queen. Maybe someone from the Jewish nation. So that's what's going to happen in the next section of this story. And I hope I'll see you again soon. Have a great day.